We get from the car, step over the threshold, and somebody says, "Okay, that's it." What do you mean, that's it? They sign a cross and say, "You'll never get out alive. You'll go through the chimney, the smoke coming out only." That is what a guard told a 19-year-old boy named Nikolai Choprenko the moment he arrived at Dachau concentration camp in February of 1943. He was not Jewish, he was Ukrainian. He had been arrested in a Nazi sweep for forced laborers, accused falsely of trying to escape, and shipped to a place whose iron gate read in German, "Arbeit macht frei," work sets you free. It did not. For the next 2 years, he would be beaten, starved, worked at gunpoint, and forced to watch other men die within arm's reach of him. When American soldiers finally found him, not even in the main camp, but in a column of dying prisoners on a forced death march away from it, he weighed 75 pounds. 75 pounds, less than most 10-year-old children weigh today. He is 100 years old now. He is one of a vanishing handful of people alive who can still describe, in his own voice, exactly what that looked like, and exactly what it felt like to be free. This is his story, told the way he told it, to a CBS News crew, to his own family, and to the 99-year-old American veteran who, without either of them knowing it for 75 years, may have helped liberate him. In the seconds after that guard told him he would die there, Nikolai Choprenko did not know one essential fact that would define the rest of his life. He did not know that he would survive. Most of the people who heard those same words at that same gate did not. Dachau was not built to kill quickly. It was built to kill slowly, through labor, starvation, and disease, and to make a person watch it happen to everyone around them first. More than 200,000 people passed through Dachau between 1933 and 1945. At least 40,000 of them died there. Some estimates, factoring in the chaos of the war's final months, place the true number higher. Dachau was the first concentration camp the Nazi regime built, opened in 1933, before the war even began, before most of the world had any concept of what a concentration camp would come to mean. It became the model. SS guards were trained there before being sent to run other camps across occupied Europe. By 1943, when a 19-year-old Ukrainian boy stepped through its gate, the camp had already been operating for a decade. He had no idea how he had ended up there. To understand that, you have to go back further, back to a childhood that had already been destroyed once, years before the Nazis ever touched it. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Nick Hope is 100 years old. Dan Doherty, the American soldier whose unit helped liberate the camp Hope was held in, is 99. There will come a point soon when there is no one left who can tell this story in their own voice. This channel exists to make sure these accounts do not disappear with them. Stay with us. What happened to this one teenager in one Ukrainian farming village in 1932 set in motion everything that followed. Nikolai Choprenko was born in 1924 in a small town called Petrovka in Ukraine. His family farmed the land. By his own description, decades later, they were not poor. "We were rich, but it was not long." Joseph Stalin's collectivization campaign reached Ukraine when Nikolai was a young boy. The Soviet state declared his family capitalists who had exploited their neighbors. "My father's house," they said, "you are rich, you capitalist, you exploit other people." They confiscated it. Lands, house. What followed has a name in history, the Holodomor, a famine deliberately engineered by Soviet policy that killed millions of Ukrainians between 1932 and 1933. It was a revolution by force. Everything was by force, you know? What he did, he cut all food, clothes, work, houses, cut off completely. It was 1932, 1933. I was about 9 years old. 2 of his brothers died in that famine. For years afterward, his family's diet was reduced to potatoes, sauerkraut, pickles, and, when there was any, bread. 1 set of clothing per person. His father worked in a coal mine in exchange for food. Nikolai was 9 years old when he learned what it felt like to have everything taken from him for the first time. It would not be the last.
When Nazi Germany invaded Ukraine in 1941, something happened that is almost impossible to imagine in hindsight. People celebrated. "Oh, this is good. The Germans come and they will help us to create new, everything new." They made a mistake. Nikolai was 17. After a decade under Stalin, the arrival of a new occupying power looked to a starving and traumatized population like liberation. It was the opposite. Within months, the Germans in his town, including a young German girl whom Nikolai had fallen for, were ordered back to Germany. I said goodbye the last night I was there. The next morning, she was gone. Oh, brother, I was upset. Then, the Nazis began rounding up young Ukrainian men for forced labor. Nick Hope said his town celebrated when the Germans invaded because after a decade of Stalin-engineered famine, any change looked like hope. Within a year, that same regime would send him to Dachau. What do you think it does to a person to watch the thing you celebrated as your rescue become the thing that destroys you? I want to know how you sit with that.
Nikolai and his friends were standing in a food line one day without their identification papers when German soldiers stopped them. "They put us in the jail. What can we do now?" Next day, next morning, they say, "Oh, maybe you go to Germany to work. It will be a good life. Make lots of money." Lying. I would say, no. The SS guards holding him invented a story that he had tried to escape custody. It was not true. It did not need to be true. It was simply the justification used to force him onto a train, along with roughly 50 other Ukrainian men, none of whom went willingly. He never got the chance to say goodbye to his family. He never saw his parents again. Munich, Germany, 1942 through 1943. For the next year, 18-year-old Nikolai was a slave laborer at a German munitions factory in Munich, working with dynamite, among the most dangerous work in the entire forced labor system. "I'm so homesick, I thought I'd die. I'm 17 years old. My parents don't know where I am. What happened to me? I'm separate from home, friends, family." 12 men slept in each barrack. Their bedding was made of paper. The Germans had promised wages of 20 marks, money that as forced laborers with no real way to ever use. He had one set of clothes and no underwear for 11 months. Discarded fabric scraps were thrown out at the factory regularly, Nikolai noticed. "This material, what they didn't use, would go to the trash all the time." I say, "Listen, we don't have underwear. I can make it out of this thing in the trash there." I pick it out the trash. He hid the scraps under his bed. During a raid, the SS found them. I tried to explain it as garbage. "Listen," I said, "listen, 11 months, no underwear. I want to make out of this." I can't explain. He just was so mad. 11 months without underwear. They called it theft. They called it sabotage. They sent him to a concentration camp. A boy taking discarded fabric scraps from a factory trash pile at 18 years old after a year of forced labor, malnutrition, and total isolation from everyone he ever knew was the act that determined where he would spend the next 2 years of his life and very nearly the rest of it. He was sent to Dachau for taking trash out of a bin to make underwear after 11 months without any. There was no trial, no proportional consequence, nothing resembling justice, just an arbitrary decision by one furious guard. How do you process the idea that a person's entire fate in a system like that could turn on something this small?
Dachau, Germany, February 1943. He remembers the drive. About 20 minutes in the open bed of a truck with 6 other boys and men, not knowing exactly what was ahead, but already certain it would not be good. Then the gate, the words painted across it, and the words a guard said to him the moment he crossed the threshold. "I just have in my mind, I'm going to die here or something, absolutely." What he describes next is not a single event, it is a sustained daily condition, months upon months of it, with no relief, no end date, and no information about whether it would ever stop. "I remember the smell, like barbecue from bodies, dead bodies, terrible." He saw the camp's gas chamber operating. He saw what he describes as evil medical experiments performed on prisoners. He saw a level of starvation so total that hunger itself became the only thought most people had room for. Always in my mind was bread, 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 bread.
There is one memory he returns to that captures, more than any statistic could, what daily survival inside Dachau actually meant. A cart moving through the camp, carrying bodies, and at the bottom of that cart, a man who was not yet dead. He says, "Friend, please help me, help me." I could do nothing. Alive, alive, he goes the direction of the crematorium. Terrible, everything is upside down in my mind. A living man being carried toward a crematorium, asking a teenage boy for help that the teenage boy had absolutely no power to give. That is what Nikolai Choprenko carried with him, silently, for the rest of his life, from inside Dachau. He has said in later interviews that one thing kept him oriented during those months, something his grandfather had taught him long before any of this began. Thanks to my grandfather, he teaches me a lot of things, but patience, any condition, patience. Nick Hope is telling you in his own words what it took to survive long enough to be found. He is not the only one. There were tens of thousands of people inside Dachau in the spring of 1945 in the same condition he was, and tens of thousands more who did not survive long enough to be found at all. If this story is reaching you the way it should be, subscribe now and stay through to the end.
Dachau Allach subcamp, 1943 to 1945. After roughly 3 months in Dachau's main camp, Nikolai was transferred to one of its satellite labor camps, Allach, to work in a factory. The factory belonged to BMW. BMW has since publicly acknowledged its use of forced and concentration camp labor during the Nazi era. Roughly half its wartime workforce, according to the company's own historical disclosures, was made up of prisoners like Nikolai. He says, "They put me first on a conveyor. I would put 2 parts of a cylinder and put together with a special instrument." 2 more years of forced labor. 2 more years of violence used as routine discipline. Nikolai was once accused of sabotaging his work, a charge with the same evidentiary weight as the underwear charge that sent him there in the first place. They called number 44249, "Step out. That's my number." I said, "Oh my, it's finished." They bring me to the table, belly down. One guy holds my hand. One guy holds my head and my feet. The SS made other prisoners watch the punishments. Sometimes they forced a fellow prisoner to administer the beating. This time, they ordered a Soviet prisoner named Karl Wagner to whip Nikolai. Wagner refused. He says, "I can't beat him. I can't beat him." He suffered for this, for me. Big sacrifice. Karl Wagner later wrote a book about the encounter. Its title, translated from German, is "I Do Not Strike." Wagner was punished for his refusal. Nikolai was beaten, anyway, by someone else. When they finished, I feel like somebody put boiling water on my back. I lost my mind. There's only bones there, no meat. The next day, I have to go to work. A man who never met him chose to be punished rather than become the hand that hurt him. That is the entire moral architecture of this story in a single decision. Karl Wagner refused a direct order to whip a fellow prisoner and was punished for it, and then wrote an entire book about that single moment of refusal decades later. He had nothing to gain. He had everything to lose. What do you think makes one person in a system built entirely on cruelty choose in a single instant not to participate in it? By April of 1945, American forces were closing in on Munich. Nikolai remembers U.S. bombers dropping leaflets over the Allach camp, warning that the nearby factory would be bombed that week and that civilians should leave. The next morning, American planes flew low overhead. One crashed and exploded, killing the pilot. Then a bomb about 20 feet away from me exploded, covered me with dust and rocks and everything. I say, "Okay, I'm finished." But no, I'm still alive. As American and Allied forces closed in on the Dachau camp system in late April 1945, the SS made a calculated decision. They would not leave the evidence of the camp's population for the Allies to find intact. Beginning April 26, 1945, the Germans forced more than 7,000 prisoners, most of them Jewish, out of Dachau's main camp on a death march south toward Tegernsee. Anyone who could not keep walking was shot. Others died of hunger, cold, or exhaustion along the route. Nikolai at Allach was forced onto a death march of his own.
2 days we walk in the rain. It was dangerous. We'd walk and fall down, and that's it. You're finished. They'd kill you right away. I hear boom, boom, boom. When the column came under fire and chaos broke out along the line, Nikolai and a friend ran for the tree line. "Oh, brother, the American tanks come. There's a highway and it's full of tanks, maybe 100 of them. We come out and cry, 'We are free! We are free!' Dancing, crying. You can't explain it. People just trying for their freedom. They're free, but not all of them. They're free, but not all of them." 6 words. The entire weight of who did not make it to that tree line is inside them. Near Dachau, April 1945, the 45th Infantry Division. An 18-year-old American soldier named Dan Doherty, serving in C Company, 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, was advancing toward Munich with no idea what his unit was about to find. We had come upon this long train of boxcars. We get up to it and make the horrifying discovery that the cars contained just totally emaciated human corpses. Turns out there were 39 boxcars with 2,310 bodies. His company did not yet understand what a concentration camp even was. Later that morning, we came to a tall picket fence about 7 feet high. This turned out to be the perimeter of the Dachau Allach camp. All of a sudden, the prisoners realized we were the U.S. Army, and the celebration began. We gave them all of our rations, cigarettes, our candy. Doherty's platoon was at the Allach subcamp, the same subcamp Nikolai had been held in for 2 years, for roughly 3 hours that day. During that window, Nikolai was already gone, already forced out onto the death march, already running for the trees as gunfire broke out along the column. The 2 men may have been separated at that camp by a margin of hours. Neither knew the other existed for the next 75 years. Dan Doherty's company was at the exact camp Nick Hope had spent 2 years in for roughly 3 hours, and Hope had already been marched out before they arrived. 2 men, the same place, hours apart, not meeting for 75 years. Do you think there is meaning in a near miss like that, or is it simply what happens when millions of individual stories all pass through the same few square miles of history? What you are watching is not a dramatization. Every word Nick Hope and Dan Doherty say in this story, they said on camera decades after these events for a CBS documentary crew in 2024. If you want to see these 2 men actually meet, actually sit across from each other, and hear each other's side of that same morning in April of 1945, that footage exists, and it is one of the most quietly devastating things either man has done on camera. If this story has earned it, subscribe and share it with one person who needs to hear it. There are very few of these accounts left to record in a living person's own voice.
A farmhouse near Dachau, April 1945. American soldiers directed German farmers in the area to take in escaped and liberated prisoners, feed them, shelter them, begin the impossible task of putting a human body that had been starved for 2 years back together.
He says, "Say, listen, here's about 100 prisoners. Give him food, sleep, wash."
It should have been the end of the danger. It was not. A body that has been starved for years cannot simply be fed normally again. The sudden return of food, fat, and sugar can overwhelm a starved digestive and metabolic system catastrophically, a condition now understood clinically as refeeding syndrome. Liberating armies across multiple camps lost survivors in the days and weeks after liberation for exactly this reason. Nikolai, at 75 pounds, nearly became one of them.
"I go so far. Not this is how I should go. No, 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 no."
He says in the documentary that he believed in that moment he was dying, and that his mother appeared to him in a dream and told him to eat dried pears.
"My mother says, son, if you have a problem in your stomach, eat dried pears." Oh, brother, I heard that and it disappeared.
The farmer sheltering him in the chaos of that week somehow produced a bag of dried pears.
He says, "Here, don't die."
He survived 2 years inside Dachau. He nearly didn't survive the act of being fed. Calistoga and Fairfield, California, 2020. Nick Hope, the name Nikolai Choprenko gave himself after the war when he and his wife Nadia, also a Holocaust survivor, moved to Northern California in the 1960s, settled in Calistoga. He became a builder in the Napa Valley. Dan Doherty settled an hour away in Fairfield in 1953.
For nearly 75 years, the two men lived close enough to have crossed paths at a grocery store. They never did. Both men were invited, separately, to the annual commemoration ceremonies held at the Dachau memorial site. Hope as a survivor, Doherty as a liberator. Both had attended, in different years, without ever overlapping. It was the COVID-19 pandemic of all things that finally connected them when the 2020 ceremony moved online and the two men ended up in the same virtual room. I had no idea anybody like that lived around here. It's been a big surprise to find out there's a longtime Dachau prisoner living in Calistoga, just an hour away. They met in person shortly after, and when a CBS 13 documentary crew brought them together again in 2024, Hope about to turn 100, Doherty about to turn 99, the two men sat down, face to face, and told each other directly what they remembered from that same week in April of 1945. My number, 44249, I just become zero man, a prisoner of war. You are nothing there, zero. Brave American soldiers when they come,
Germany, years after the war. There is one more piece of this account that Nick Hope has chosen to tell, and it may be the most difficult to sit with. Years after the war, while he was still living in Germany, he encountered, in public, a former SS commander who had beaten him repeatedly at the camp. I heard his voice. My heart almost stopped beating, but the Spirit of God says, "Take it easy. Everything is past. It is different now." He followed the man home. He knocked on the door. I say, "I come here to forgive you. Give me a handshake. I forgive you, everything that you have done to me." This script will not interpret that decision for you, and will not tell you what to feel about it. Forgiveness of this kind is not a universal obligation, and survivors who choose differently are not lesser for it. It is simply what Nick Hope says he chose, and what he says it gave him. That is God's will, that we love each other, not hate each other. This whole terrible, terrible tragedy in the world never, never, never happen again. Hope chose to forgive a man who beat him repeatedly. That is his choice, made for his own reasons, and it is not a standard anyone else has to meet. What does this part of his account bring up for you? Nick Hope spent 4 years in a hospital in Munich, recovering after the war. It was there that he met Nadia Tanasova, another Holocaust survivor, who became his wife. They had 3 children and built a life in Calistoga, California. He has said that the years after liberation were not simple ones, that trauma showed up as anger, as overeating, as drinking, long before he found, in his own words, the faith that gave him a way to carry what had happened to him. Dan Dougherty went on to live a full life in Fairfield, California, raising a family, and has spent decades afterward still asking the question his own experience at Dachau never let him put down. How is it possible the most educated, religious, churched society in Europe could produce and sustain the Third Reich? That's a very, very difficult question, and it's still being asked. People are still trying to figure out how something like that could happen. In 2024, Nick Hope turned 100. Dan Dougherty turned 99. The family that helped him survive that first impossible week of freedom is, by his own account, the reason he is alive to tell any of this at all. They are both, by any reasonable measure, running out of time to tell this story themselves, which is the only reason it is being told here. They're free, but not all of them. If this reached you, do not just move on to the next video. Write down one true sentence about what you just heard, in your own words, not a summary, just what it did to you. And if you can, share this so one more person hears Nick Hope and Dan Dougherty say it in their own voices while they still can. Before you go, you might think the story of Dachau ended with liberation. It didn't. For one survivor, named Jean Laforêt, a French resistance fighter deported to Dachau, the nightmare was only beginning. After months inside Dachau, he was transferred to another camp called Allach. There, he was forced to work in a factory. Not just any factory, a factory owned by a company that millions of people still recognize today, BMW. Decades later, BMW would publicly acknowledge its use of concentration camp and forced labor during the war. According to the company's own historical disclosures, nearly half of its wartime workforce consisted of prisoners and forced laborers, and Jean Laforêt was one of them.
In our next story, we'll follow his journey from Dachau to the factory floor and uncover one of the most surprising connections between a modern global company and the horrors of World War II. Trust me, you do not want to miss this one. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications now, because the moment this story goes live, you'll want to be among the first to watch it. And when you hear what happened to Jean Laforet next, you may never look at BMW the same way again.